Hello and welcome to this TechNet video. Today I'm going to talk you through the colour tab on Davinci Resolve. So if you're following along with this whole Davinci tutorial, you should have a fully edited sequence in your edit tab. At the end of last video, we discussed the fact that all these clips are looking different. And so now our job is to make them all look uniform and create a look for our sequence. So I'm gonna head on over to the color tab. Now don't worry, I completely understand that this looks super intimidating to start with, but I'm gonna talk you through each tab, so hopefully you're feeling a bit more confident. The first thing I'm gonna do is make this a little bit more tidy. So I'm gonna get rid of our gallery. So now I can see our footage a little bit clearer. Now underneath we have our timeline, so we can scrub through and see what is happening in our timeline. If this isn't helpful for you to have, then feel free to hide it and it just gives you a little bit bigger image to work with. Firstly, if you have filmed in RAW, you need to make sure that you are in the correct colour space. Now the way we do this is through a thing called LUTs. You want to find the camera that you filmed on and choose Rec 709. That is the kind of standard colour space that you want to be working with, and that will always be your first node if you are filming in RAW. Now this footage has already been converted to Rec 709, so I'm not going to touch it. The first job we want to do is get this clip the same as this clip. Now, whatever way around you want to match, I'm going to try and match this shot to this one here. There is a kind of hack that Davinci has that works, and it doesn't work all the time, so let's hope that it makes our lives a bit easier. The first thing that I want to do is select the clip that I want to edit, and I'm going to right click over the clip I want to match, and you'll see that there is a setting to shot match to this clip, and let Davinci do its thing, and you can see now they are a little bit closer. They're not perfect, and this tool does not work every time. Don't rely on it. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z and undo because I think I can do a better job manually. Over on this side of the screen, we have our nodes. Now this is kind of a fancy way of saying the layers. We want to create different layers of correction and grade to build up towards our final image. And it's really important that you keep these separated, because if you want to go back and change something later, it's going to be a lot easier to identify where you need to change it. Job one in color correction is to find our white balance. If you have filmed correctly, this should have been done very well in camera, but we always have to make sure. I'm going to use this clip because this is going to be the most obvious to notice a difference on. So we know these walls should pretty much be white, and they don't look very white. So I'm going to head to this section with the 3 dots in a triangle, and I also want to get up what's called our waveform. So that is over here. I'm going to make sure this is selected, and I've made sure it's on waveform. Now you can also add what's called a low pass filter, which basically gets rid of the haziness, so you can see the lines better. I like to do this because I think it makes my job a little bit easier. So I'm going to click on those 3 dots and click on low pass filter, and you'll just see how it crisps up those lines a little bit. Now if you've heard colour described in RGB, that's red, green and blue, and those 3 colours are going to make up our image, and when they combine they make white. So you'll see on this graph you have the green and the red pretty much sat on top of each other, and then the blue slightly further down. Colour correction is a process of minute adjustments, and there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You want to look at the graph and reference that, but you also want to trust your eyes, because sometimes lining all of those colours up on top of each other to attempt to create white will not always return the desired result. So we want to trust our eyes, we know what we're looking for, and we use the graph as a guide. So I want to raise this blue up to meet the green and the red. So I'm going to go to the blue output and increase that number, and you can see on our graph that that is rising. So now if it's sat directly on top of each other, you can see how here it is white, and you can start to see where it lays on top of each other. But I'm thinking this is probably still a little bit green. So I'm going to head to my green output and I'm going to decrease that green. And now it's looking a little bit better, maybe a tad bit red. So I'm going to head to the red output and decrease that red a little bit. As I said, this is a process of minute adjustments, so it's going to take time. Be patient, and sometimes you're going to need to take screen breaks, because if you're staring at it for too long, you kind of get immune to those changes that you're making. A good way to check this is to hit this button here. Now this is going to get rid of all the changes we've made and show us our original clip, so you can check your progress as you go. Now you can see that this is our original and this is our edited version. So already it's looking a little bit crisper, more natural, and that's what we want. The next stage is to focus on our lighting. So we want to get this not too bright where it's hitting the top of this graph here, and not too dark where it's hitting the bottom of our graph here. We want it to sit kind of in the middle. We want to right click on this node and press add node, add serial. This is going to create a fresh template, a fresh pane of glass over our project, if you will, that we can add changes to. Every time we move on to a new step or a new tool, you want to do this, because as I said, it's going to make it much easier if you want to go back. If suddenly I want to adjust that white balance, I know I can go back to that first tab and adjust it without it affecting anything else. So I'm going to head to the first circle with the dot in the middle. It looks a little bit like a target. And now we have these 4 options. I'm going to talk you through what each one does, and then we're going to make an informed decision on what tool is going to be best to use. Lift moves our graph up and down, getting darker and lighter, but you can see that it is squishing that graph as it does. Gamma raises that graph up and down, and you can start to see where the limits are, the boundaries. So it's going to hit almost a wall and everything's going to squish up against it at the top and the bottom. So we want to avoid that. Then we have our gain, and you can see what this does is it's stretching that top of the graph but trying to keep the bottom of the graph where it is. And our offset will move our whole graph without manipulating it in any way up and down. Now we also have our curves, which is sat in the middle. This is just a different way of doing the same thing. So if I pinch anywhere along this line, it's going to create a point at which we can move that line. So up here, these are the brightest parts of your image, and down here, these are the darkest parts of your image. So you can see how I'm raising those darkest parts up or getting rid of those lightest parts. And as we can see, it really is very small adjustments that we need to make. We want to kind of push and pull that light around to make sure everything in frame can be seen. There's not anything that's blown out as too bright or nothing that's too dark. Another way to do this same thing is to jump a tab over and look at these wheels. We can manipulate the very darkest parts of our image and just focus on them and just brighten them up. We can focus on the shadows and brighten them up. We can focus on the very lightest parts of our image and brighten them or darken them depending on what we want. And we can also focus on the global image. So everything we can raise the exposure of or lower the exposure of. I'm now going to make some changes using those tools that we've just learned. So I'm going to make sure I've selected our new node, and I'm going to try and move this graph up a little bit because it's quite dark. So I'm going to use the offset to bring it up a little bit. I'm going to then use the gain to start to spread out that graph more. I'm then going to right click and add a node in serial, so that means just the next one along, and head to this tab, and I want to make sure that these light parts aren't clipping, where it means it's hitting the top or the bottom of our graph. So I'm going to just lower the exposure on the lightest parts of our image slightly and up it in the darkest parts of our image slightly. And I'm going to touch the shadows a little bit as well because they're a little bit dark. Now I'm going to head back to our second node, back to this first tab, and just up the gain a little bit more. And I think I'm pretty happy with this as kind of a starting point for our correction. Again, I'm going to hit this button up here. This was our original, and this is what it looks like now. As you can see, lots of layers of minute adjustments has created a look that I'm pretty happy with as a starting point. I'm going to play it through because obviously we want kind of an even baseline. You can see that maybe this is a bit bright because it's clipping at the top of our graph here. So you might want to keep adjusting until you are happy. Across the board, across your whole project, you want to make sure that everything's corrected before you move on. Then we can move on to creating a grade or look. Now this stock footage is from a horror film, so I want to create that kind of spooky, scary atmosphere. So I'm going to right click, add a new node in serial, and this is where we can start to play a little bit more. I want to create a kind of darker blue tone, similar to this clip here. First thing that I want to do is create more of a blue effect. Now I'm going to hop over to this tab in our first target, and that's going to bring up our shadow, midtone and highlight. I want to adjust these in different ways to create that depth that I'm going for. So in the shadows, I'm going to click and hold this little circle and drag it slightly towards the blue. I'm going to do the same for the midtones and the same for the highlights. Now you can see that that has started to clip our graph. So I'm going to add another lighting node, and on my curves I'm going to select blue and just bring down those lightest parts of the image to make sure that it is not clipping. So you can see now it's staying away from that top of our graph. I'm also going to add a node and just decrease the exposure slightly in those lightest parts of our image. So now you can see that the light is shining into this room, so we've kind of adjusted that light to make it look like it's at a different time of day. The next thing that I want to do on a new node is adjust the density of that blue. Now this is where you get a really rich filmic look, and that is on this tab here. You can see how it's separated out lots of different elements, but I want to focus on the blue. So this is your density and this is your saturation or your hue. So if I up this density, you can start to see that that light is getting much more intense. So I want to balance that out and make sure that it doesn't clip or feel like it's blowing out, but I want to give it a bit more of a rich colour. I quite like the look of that. Now I'm going to add another node, and I'm going to go to this tab here. Now this is going to select a certain colour in our frame that we can then manipulate further. I'm going to use what is called our qualifier, our eyedropper, and eyedrop onto this wall because it's still a bit green and I don't like it very much. And I'm going to go to this first target and I'm going to decrease the saturation slightly so we can see how we've lost that green tone. It's looking a bit more desaturated, a little bit more scary, but it's only affected the parts of the frame that we have qualified or selected using that eyedropper. It hasn't got rid of this lovely blue tinge that we've got from the light. I'm then going to add a node and make the entire global temperature cooler. And then I'm going to add a node using this colour selector. Now I want to make sure I am on this kind of spiderweb version, and you can also change how many of these points there are. So I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's at its maximum. And what this does is it's another way of selecting certain parts of our frame. If I hover over the frame, you can see how that selector is bouncing around the screen, showing us what different parts of the colour wheel are selected. So again, I'm going to pop on this wall and it has selected the closest dot to the colour that I've selected. And I can click and drag that dot, and you can see how it has dramatically changed the colour of the shadow, and that's what I wanted. So I've dragged that from the green side slightly more towards the blue side, and it has changed the depth and the colour in that shadow. Now the last thing I want to do for this shot is just create a bit more depth, a little bit more darkness. So I'm going to increase the shadow. So I'm going to go back to that beginning tab and just lower down our graph slightly. I'm going to try and give an even spread across the graph still, so nothing is clipping. And I'm also going to adjust using these tools. So that's second tab, just decreasing the exposure in the lightest parts of our frame and adding a little bit more shadow. And now I'm pretty happy with this, but I could sit here for hours tweaking it. And that's kind of the mindset you need to be in for a grade. It's never done. You could come back to it tomorrow and hate it and want to redo it. It is a massive process of minute adjustments. So you should make sure you always have nodes that look like this. Just one adjustment on each. One final check of what our shot was at the beginning before we did any grade. and now at the end. So you can see that dramatic transformation. I've picked a different shot to go through the last few tools with you. Now obviously there is so much more that this tab can do, and I just cannot go through it all in one video. If you want to ask about a specific tool or how you create a specific look, come and ask one of us, and if we're not available, then do your own research, have a play. A lot of this is learning by doing, so make sure that you watch other tutorials and find a way of creating the effect that you want to. I'm going to go back to this spiderweb tool, and I want to check that my actor's skin tone is accurate. It hasn't been pushed and pulled around by all the changes that I've been making. So I'm going to click this 3 dots and press show skin line. Now that's going to have an orange dotted line across our graph. Now no matter who you are, your skin tone is going to sit somewhere along that line, and it's really, really important that we make sure that that's accurate. So if I hover over my frame, that qualifier is going to come up, and I'm going to select somewhere on my actor's face. Now you can see that this dot here is very far away from that orange line, and that's why our actor looks very washed out and very pale. This kind of white blob is all of the different colours and where it kind of fits most on that graph. So you can see that that is also very far away from our skin line. So I'm going to start to slowly drag that dot up onto our skin line. And you can see that I'm stopping and I'm waiting to check what that's doing to the rest of my frame. And this is hard because I can see that it's adjusting everything else in my frame. So I'm going to Control Z, make sure it's back to the beginning, and I'm going to create a mask. Now this is going to mask around our actor's face, so my adjustments are only going to affect that. So I'm going to select our mask tool, and the circle is going to be the easiest, and I'm going to adjust it so it sits around my actor's face. The pink is going to soften our edges, so if we make that larger, there's not going to be such a harsh line between the mask and the rest of the frame. I'm going to go back to this spiderweb and qualify, and then push this around again. And you can see now it's only affecting what's inside the mask. And if you want to adjust where that mask sits, you can click power window, and that will bring back up that mask. And again, we can see what the before was and what the after was. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to continue to follow along, the next video in the series, we're going to talk about our audio levels. So now all of our visuals look lovely, but we haven't really touched our audio yet. So we want to create a rich soundscape to enhance our project.